I think we now have a quorum of the Select Board, so I'm calling the March 13, 2013 special meeting of the Select Board, an informational meeting, to order. Greetings, everybody. Thanks for coming. Has the meeting been officially warned?
Yes, it has.
Thank you. What we're going to do this evening... Oh, that's right. I've been asked first to make an announcement that Moss Kaler has set up his informational table on the south side of the gym there. And if anybody's interested in information about recycling and about composting, please speak with Moss. Moss, are you still here? All right, well, Moss will be here later. And I'll just repeat what I saw in the email yesterday, which is everybody is encouraged to go to their neighbor and ask if they want to compost too, because we're trying to get from, 450 people who have signed up to 900 households doing composting. So everybody, please ask your neighbor if they want to compost too. We're going to be purchasing composting bins and making them available at a reduced price in order to make the process easier for everybody to participate in. So, for the purposes of tonight's informational meeting, in the town report, our town meeting agenda and the town meeting portion of that agenda begins on page 8. Two of the articles come together, that being Article 18 and Article 20. Article 18 being whether the town will appropriate $765,000 from the unassigned fund balance to cover capital improvements, and Article 20, the general budget question. So I'm going to begin. I'm David Gardenstein, and Dick DeGray, the chair, is out of town, so I'm going to be chairing the meeting today. I'm going to begin by providing an overview of the budget that we prepared with the assistance of administration and staff, and that's being presented for your consideration. That budget is begins on page 61 of the town report and runs through page 78, followed by the audit. The budget that we're presenting for your consideration this year involves $14,923,357 in both revenue and expenses. That represents an increase of 1.9%, $278,233 over last year's fiscal year 2013 budget. Just like I presented last year, I want to explain where the vast majority of our costs are expended. If you were to go through line by line in this budget, you would find that we spend approximately $6,300,000 in wages for administration and staff members. We also pay benefits and insurance in the amount of $3,400,000. So in total of that $14 million, almost $15 million budget, $9,700,000 is for wages and benefits. That's 65% of the budget that we approve. Remaining additional costs, we spend $967,000 for refuse collection, that being recycling and garbage pickup. Another large ticket item, street lights and the bus and the ambulance, is $465,000. There's about another 3% of the budget. If you total up the 5 primary departments fire, police, public works, parks and recs, and the library, those five together, with both wages and costs, come to $9,760,000. So the vast majority of what's presented to you in this budget is wages, and then additional costs for maintenance of those various departments, that being costs for maintaining the roads, for maintaining the police and the fire department equipment. The budget is to a large extent level funded this year. 1.9% is the increase. We faced some increased costs over which we had no control. First off, there were some increases in wages and benefits that were required by collective bargaining agreements. We pay health insurance for all town employees in the amount this coming year estimated of $1,530,000. That's up $100,000 from last year. Liability insurance is up $43,000. Workers' comp is up $50,000. Retirement benefit is up $35,000 as well. So those increases pretty much represent the bulk of the increases that you're seeing, and they are fixed numbers over which we really had little or no control. The process for developing the budget unfolded from the late fall. Administration met, the department heads met, staff members met, and budget figures were developed by the town manager working with the department heads. The select board members met with the administration and with other employees, other staff members. I would say we probably spent in meetings somewhere between 10 and 25 hours going line by line over the budgets and questioning the assumptions that are included. We tried to make sure that all of the budget estimates are realistic assessments of what it's going to cost to run the town and all of its departments over the next year. There is an additional expense that is included in the budget in terms of the first payment for the police fire facility interest, and that is shown under bonds and notes on page 66 in the amount of $328,000 increase. So it's about 2/3 of the way down the page. You'll see that this year's bonds and notes is $410,000, and the 328 increase for the police fire is the delta from 2014 to 2013. After going through this entire process, including review of the capital plan, and that capital plan is set out page 75 to 78. So we have a 7-year capital plan where we try to map ahead what sizable capital expenses we're going to have to incur in each of the coming years. We went through all the items in the capital plan as well, pared those down as much as possible. You can see the items that remain. They include some sidewalk work at Town Hall, some hardware upgrades, some work at the library on the microfiche system, some police equipment, thermal imaging system. We're paying for a number of new vehicles for the police department, one new vehicle for the police department, I'm sorry, and then for other equipment, ballistic vests and the license plate reader. There's $375,000 capital expenditures for sidewalks and road paving. We're buying a new dump truck at $208,000, and we're replacing the 20-year-old chipper for $53,000. The total in capital expenses after the grant money that we've got to pay for it is about $765,000. And after a review of the financials, we concluded that we had significant cash reserves that have built up over the last 5 or 7 years. Is that right, about 7 years?
Yes, sir.
So we set a policy this past year about the reserve fund. I think it was a 10% reserve fund. So we're trying to keep about $1.5 million in the bank for contingencies like Hurricane Irene damages. We had an additional $765,000 approximately that had built up over and above the $1.5 million that we have agreed to keep in the bank for emergencies. And we made the decision as a select board to ask town meeting members to approve expenditure of $765,000 from the capital fund, from the undesignated unreserved, which was in the capital fund, to pay for the capital expenses that we're going to incur this coming year. That means, for example, that the dump truck that we need to purchase, that's going to cost $208,000. If we had not had the cash in the bank to pay for it, we would have had to borrow for that starting next fiscal year, and we'd be paying it off, John, over 5 years?
Probably 5.
Over 5 years. But we have the cash, so we're going to buy that dump truck. We're going to buy that chipper, again, in cash, the new police vehicles, and we'll be paying for the paving of the roads that we have to do annually and for the sidewalk repairs, again, out of the cash surplus that's built up. The cash surplus has built up over the last years as a result of a series of factors, and it's really, kudos should be given to the administration and to prior select boards for exercising careful fiscal management and allowing a fund balance to build. There's been better tax collections. The grant list has grown to a certain extent, and some of our projections that we make in the most conservative manner possible with respect to health insurance and the like, at the beginning of the year, we've been able to save money when we get our rates partway through the year. So we actually have, at this point, about $2.25 million in the bank. And the plan is to save $1.5 million for contingencies, which is the policy the board adopted, and then to spend about $750,000 of that for the capital expenses that are part of this budget. All told, although we're waiting for some additional figures, this will result in an increase in the municipal portion of the tax rate. John, I believe just about $0.015.
1.6.
1.6 cents is the estimated increase in the tax rate, although it's my understanding that we're still waiting for some additional information on that.
We'll need the grand list.
Right, the grand list needs to be finalized. So that's the overview of the budget and how it was developed and where the increases come from. We'd really like to have any questions that anybody's got about that budget and any of the line items or any other issues about it. Right. It really is for questions tonight. Dora reminds me, not for debate. Sir, if you would state your name, and Mr. Johnson wants you to go to the microphone.
Hello, testing. Oh. Check. Caleb Clark, District 2 Rep. Maybe silly questions, but quick ones. Was there a cost of living increase in if that $6 million you mentioned about staff? I didn't know how that worked out. Like, if there's a 3 to 5% cost of living increase, is it in that 1.9%?
I'll ask the town manager to respond to that.
Some of that increase, it's dependent upon the union contracts. Some of it is a union contract, and I I can't actually, because they have steps, I can't recall exactly what their percentage were, but I think for FY14, and then for the non-union staff, I believe the board has budgeted a 1% increase. And I believe for most of the unions, the across the board, although some of them have steps, some of them do not, and the police were still actually negotiating that contract, so we can't really comment on that, but are similar to that, although they may have steps. And the steps vary depending on the contract. Fire contracts have a 5-year step, so you don't have a step except for every 5 years. The Public Works and the Recreation, they don't have automatic steps. Those are dependent upon certifications, et cetera. And the police, like I said, we're negotiating that contract.
Page 65, I just noticed that under listers, there was a big department head salary increase, but it looks like there was some decreases. There was a 31%.
Yeah, we changed the structure of the listers department, changed actually this year, and Russell Rice is now the municipal appraiser, and he's getting just a huge increase. And no, wait, I remember that's not how it went. Sorry, the hours of the people have changed. Russell is working more hours than the prior municipal appraiser, Al Gerard. Al is now actually in a different job within the listers at lower hours, and yeah, and then there's also, we're going to actually have a retirement this year, and so it's mainly just a changing of hours worked and job duties.
2 more quick questions. I noticed line striping was up 33%, and I've noticed that the crosswalks fade a lot. Is that part of different paint? Hopefully.
Well,
or I don't know much about paint on roads, but
as a result of the fatalities that we had last year, the Select Board made the decision to go back to twice-a-year striping.
Okay.
So the crosswalks and the lines were painted before the snow flew, but as the plows, particularly the grader, have been going over those crosswalks, you've seen them degrading over the last 6 or 8 weeks more than they had before. But Public Works can't restripe until the temperature is warm enough at night when they do the work. So maybe the Public Works Director can tell us when the new striping is likely to begin again. Thank you.
The line striping will take place in the spring, and the increase is due to painting twice a year. We did switch the type of paint that we use. We're now using a latex base, which is much safer. There's less chemicals, so the cost eventually will go down overall for painting. But we expect to be out there as soon as we can in the spring to paint.
great. And I haven't done this in other towns before. When you give us the big overview of the brunt, like $6 million for this, are we unusual compared to other towns? Are towns around the country all different? Is there context that would it be of value to us? Brief. I don't have any. So.
With regard to the overall budget, or with regard to the personnel, or?
I know Brattleboro is unique in many ways. And I just wondered, is our budget unique too in some ways?
It's really hard to compare budgets sometimes, and particularly when you're looking at taxes with other communities, because so much is dependent upon the services that are provided, and so it's hard to find comparable communities in some ways. We are typical of any business that doesn't actually have raw material that we're buying and manufacturing something, in that the most, so the bulk of our costs is in the human resources, as opposed to, if we were yogurt company having to purchase milk and and large equipment, things like that. So we're typical in that regard. We have some services that some communities have privatized. Trash pickup is one, but that may be offset. Some communities have volunteer fire departments, and we don't. It's also difficult if you look outside the state sometimes in comparing, because some towns have county budgets. Or have stronger counties, in which counties are taking care of road maintenance and things outside of what we would consider the town proper. And in Vermont, without a strong county government, you're taking care of your roads, from border to border. When we've done some analysis of, the question really is often asked less of the overall budget and more of, why is our tax rate so high? And we continue to look at that and try to figure out how can we, because the tax rate is just a reflection of our budget, and how can we reduce that in ways. I don't think that's me. I think what you're going to find over the next, few years, we've got some really good history. We've gotten a good foundation built, and I would suspect that the upcoming board will be listening to all of the candidates as they were being interviewed, and knowing the direction that this current board was taking us. I think we're going to have more of those discussions about, well, how do we reduce costs? Where are we spending money? Maybe where we wouldn't have to, things like that. So I think we're going to get more in depth into that. That question as the year goes on. I think the intention is that we're going to start talking about our budgets throughout the year, and not just during the 3 or 4 months that we normally spend.
Excellent, thank you.
Mr. Wilmerding?
First off, I want to just say, John Wilmerding, District 3, I appreciate that very lucid explanation that you just gave Mr. Gartenstein. And I want to reflect back what I thought I heard you say. And that is that aside from expense categories that are increasing that we can't help, we can't help the fact that they're increasing, like, for instance, health insurance for employees, and aside from the increase that is mandated by this body, which is the police fire bond, which we're going to start paying the interest on that. Aside from that, you've nearly achieved a level-funded budget. I think I heard you say that. Is that correct?
I think it's very much a status quo budget. That's correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Stark.
Julie Stark, District 1. Same old. Here's my yellow lines in my book.
All right.
Okay.
That's why we're here.
On page 66, under risk management, we've got a lot higher on workers' comp and a lot higher on liability, and I heard you mention that. And I'm assuming that we are now in a poor risk category, and that's why it went that high?
My understanding is that the workers' comp has to do with our history.
And claims.
Yes.
So I guess...
and the insurance, maybe Barb can speak to the...
My big question is, are we looking at that and looking at why we're having more claims and trying to figure out ways to alleviate that problem? Because that higher rate will be with us now for at least 3 years, is my understanding.
It probably will be. We are self-insured through the Vermont League of Cities and Towns with the workers' comp and the property and liability, but it's essentially the same thing. And we are working on that. Their Health and Safety Committee was established under John Leisenring, has continued under John O'Connor, and that committee actually looks at the claims that are coming in. The first report of injuries that are coming in. They get the monthly or quarterly reports from the league. They've started. They've been doing now for the last year to 2 years, maybe a lot of that, a little longer than that, going to the different departments doing inspections for safety concerns. We've been working, Wade Masur, who is with the Vermont League of Cities and Towns in their risk management, comes to those meetings, and the committee that does it are staff people. Come to those meetings and assist them with reviewing maybe other policies that we should be looking at, and also what to look for in the claims that we might be able to reduce some of the claims. Also to help them look for patterns, what patterns there might be. So I feel as though we are on the road to, I think, the number of claims we've had. A lot of them are also, a good portion of them tend to be with a staff that's been with us for a while, and so they have kind of repetitive movement claims. We've had shoulder issues, we've had knee issues, we've had a couple hips, and we tend to, if you think about our they tend to be in our physically active public works, fire, police, who are more physically active throughout their careers and are more vulnerable to those kind of injuries.
Okay, thank you. Also on page 66, $30,000 for a zoning consultant. We've never had that budgeted before, so could somebody explain that?
I'll speak to that. As part of the town plan revision, one of the goals was revision of the zoning ordinance. I was 9 years on the Development Review Board, 5 or 6 years as chair. I don't remember. Dora was on the Development Review Board with me for quite some time. There may be other people. Russell and I were on the Development Review Board together. Helene and I were on the board for 9 years together. The zoning ordinance in Brattleboro is arcane and complicated. It makes development much more difficult in town because of the hurdles and lack of a streamlined process. And we made a commitment as part of the town plan, and we're backing it up in the budget, to hire a consultant to begin the rewrite of the zoning ordinance.
Okay.
I don't know if Rod has anything else to say about that.
It's not only arcane, it doesn't respond to the community's expectations in any fundamental way, and the town plan process established what the community expected for land development controls. And so part of that cost is to hire.
Don't forget to use the mic, okay? You can stand by Billy.
Yeah.
Sure, bite.
And so part of the purpose of this consultant service would be to work with participants, residents and other property owners in the town, to develop a more effective ordinance.
Okay, street lights, up 11,000. Are we putting in LED lights yet? Is this for new light fixtures? Like, what are we doing for another $11,000?
What I heard,
Actually, it's $212,000.
what I heard in the budget planning process was that this was the proper estimated number for costs for light fixtures going forward. We did adopt last year a plan to move towards LED lights for the street lights. I will give you a personal perspective on that because there's one right outside my bedroom. It's a nightmare. It's like daytime outside my bedroom window all the time. And so before there's more adoption of these streetlights and more conversion, I really hope that the administration and the energy coordinator are going to look into the matter, because I'm not sleeping the same, and it's been 6 or 8 months. But yes, $212,000 is what they told us lights were going to cost next year. They're supposed to be cheaper.
Yeah, no, yeah, we didn't really budget a savings of the switch over to the LED because we have budgeted a savings in the past for that, and the installation, for whatever reason, hasn't occurred at the same rate as what we thought it would because, citizens, they complain about that stuff. And so the reality is we just wanted to be conservative and keep it at more of a level funded, and hopefully we'll realize a savings in the next year on those.
Are we adding, throughout the budget, any staff or any hours for people? Because there are several categories where it looks like where in Public Works on page 70, staff salaries up 23,000, mechanic salaries up 15%. So it just looks like we're adding hours. I'm not sure if we're adding people anywhere along the line other than the zoning consultant.
I think last year we added a part-time person to mow the lawns at the West River Park. There's no new staff at this time.
I don't recall. Some of those changes in the Public Works is where you're going to notice those the most. Some of those are reallocation of time to different line items. It also becomes a little harder to see because some people are allocated between utilities, which is the budget you don't see, the enterprise fund, and Public Works. So there's some reallocation of time that goes on. The other thing is that when we budgeted for this year, we had a person out on military leave, and so we weren't paying for that person, and so they weren't in the budget. They're back, and their salary's back in the budget. So.
And just to follow up on what Barb said, you're seeing the operating budget. You're not seeing the enterprise fund budgets here. So the utilities fund that runs the water and wastewater, I think that's about a $3 million budget. And the parking budget, neither of those are included here. And the allocations for Public Works employees go from the operating into the utilities fund budget.
And I just want to make sure I'm on the right page for the unassigned, unrestricted, blah, blah, blah fund, which I think is on page 91, but you said there was $2.25 million, and I'm only seeing 1627. So
John can explain it better, but the 765 that's paying for the capital is listed in the audit as assigned. Is that right, John? Yes. Explain why, if you could.
Anytime any funds are allocated to a fund other than the general fund, they can't have really an unassigned fund balance. They are assigned for capital projects. So it just so happened that when we closed the fiscal year last year with the capital fund, we had about $1.8 million in cash in that fund. And we had projects that we had approved that hadn't been done yet that amounted to $971,000. So that left us with a fairly large balance in that fund, cash balance, that we're using to fund the projects next year in the capital fund. And the reason you see a difference between the number on page 91 is that's only the general fund's unassigned balance.
Thanks for your questions. Anybody else? Anybody who's in attendance? Ms. Disler.
Arlene Disler, District 2. So for the police fire, we're taking a hunk out of the general fund for this year to pay the interest, which is sort of cheating a little bit. I mean, it's allaying the real effect. So I wonder if it's been figured out going forward what the real payments are going to be and the effect on our taxes.
The best I can say, and then I'll give it to John and Barb, is that significant tax impact was explained as associated with the police fire bond, and the first year's impact is at $328,000 in interest. Next year, we're going to face very significant hurdles in developing the budget, because we're going to face the first year of the capital principal cost on that bond. We're not probably going to have the same level of cash buildup in the capital fund, and we're going to have the same types of ordinary increases that we can't control. Spoon was clear when I spoke with him before the election about trying to work regularly this year to see where we could save money over the course of the year to try to plan for next year's budget, recognizing what kind of a hole we're going to be in. And that's the best we're going to be able to do. He was exactly right about trying to plan for that. There's going to be a big gap we're going to have to fill next year. This isn't a responsible budget for this year. We start working on planning next year's budget tomorrow, you know? John or Barb, if you have anything else, I'd like to hear. But
Just to be clear, it's not it's the first, when you have a bond, the first year payment is only interest. So it's not being, and that is showing as cash. We're not using reserves to pay for that. So it is actually being shown there. And the next, the next question that will be coming as we get further into the planning may be to discuss how we structure the bonds. Do we borrow all the money in one bond 1 year, this year? Do we split it because we're now with a better understanding with a project manager that we probably won't start construction until the spring of 2014 anyway. So maybe we look at, and that'll be a discussion with the board on restructuring how the bonds, and so that there's a slower impact. But I think that we've always been very open and upfront about the cost of the project and the cost of the bond. The other thing that's different with bonds, just so people know, as opposed to your mortgage or something like that, bonds, you don't pay an even amount every year. You pay the most, your highest bond payment is in your second year, and then the rates, then they continue to go down after that, and that's just how bonds are structured.
Dora?
I agree with you, Arlene. We kind of had found money this year, and it was used to offset what would have been the increases. I voted against the budget because it does contain those interest payments. I don't think we should be doing the police fire station project because I don't think we can afford it. I think people should be able to expect cuts next year. And in services that they may enjoy right now. And I don't think any responsible select board is going to allow the tax rate to go up 10.7%. And there's no sort of magic that's going to find, that amount of money in the budget. So I voted against the budget. I will vote against the budget in town meeting for just that reason.
Mr. Phillips?
Steve Phillips, District 3. So on that score, just to continue that thought, there was a pretty substantially overwhelming vote by town meeting to support the fire and police project. I had qualms about it. I know that at least one or more of the select board members also did. I'm assuming that, well, let me back up and say there was an effort to have the town as a whole weigh in on it. It was an unsuccessful, I think, a day late petition that was filed.
That petition didn't have enough signatures when it was turned in a day late.
All right. So there was a substantial effort. It was a day late and dollar short.
It did not meet the requirements of the charter.
You said that. Thank you. Yeah. So might there be any sentiment among the current or the future select board to revisit that question and let the town people weigh in. And I'm assuming that the fact that town meeting approved it does not require you to spend it. Am I right about that?
That town meeting approved it doesn't require us to spend it. At the table here is only one member of what's going to be next year's board. So I wouldn't suppose to speak about what the board may or may not do the day after or Tuesday after town meeting. That's all I'm going to say right now. I understand the issue. I've spoken with a lot of people about it. I understand everybody's concerns. Town meeting voted Steve overwhelmingly to go forward with the project and not to raise additional money. And, you know, that's the reality.
Just as a follow-up, what the discussion we did not have at town meeting last year was what are the cuts that we're going to make to keep a balanced budget? That's going to be a hard decision for somebody if, in fact, we're going to go forward on that project as presented. And it may be that the town would actually prefer not to spend quite as much money and forego those hard cuts. So I'm just throwing that out there. I think we'll have some discussion about that issue at our representative town meeting, I suspect.
And I would prefer not to have debate about it tonight if possible. Really would prefer to take questions at this point because there's other items. I think Mr. Cadron had his hand up.
Hello, David Cadron, District 2. I have some questions that are kind of nitpicky, but they're more examples. One of them was I did a very quick and not precise, but very quick add up of postage expenses. The town's going to spend over $20,000 on postage this year. My question is in terms of a broader idea of what we are doing to make our government more efficient. Has there been a lot of talk of increasing efficiency? Is it really necessary in our digital age where we can do almost everything online to be spending such a large sum of money on postage for the town? What are you guys really doing to increase the administrative efficiency of the town?
Okay, I'm happy to answer that. Most of the mailings we do are by statute. While we may be in a digital world, the statutes are not, and the statutes require most things be postmarked. You can't email tax bills, you can't email utility bills, you can't email ballots, you can't
well, that's just an example.
And I understand.
You know.
And so what we've done in the past is we have, just continuing on with that example, is we've looked at what can we do via email. One of the bigger changes, one of the things that cost $10,000, it was actually, it was about $7,000 to $8,000 a year, was the mailing of the town report. And putting it in the newspaper. We came to this body, we asked that be changed, and now it's available digitally to anyone, but we no longer put it in the paper, printed in the paper. So we do continue to look at the efficiencies of things like that. We would much prefer, as department heads, we would much prefer to spend the limited funds on actual services, and so we do continue to look at efficiencies. We've continued to look at efficiencies with regard to energy, with regard to the vehicles that we have. It was 4 years ago now, Steve, where we got rid of pickup trucks and went to the small Aveo cars for fuel efficiency. Looking at things in those ways. So I think that's an ongoing struggle, and I think it's an ongoing requirement of looking at efficiencies and looking at items like that. You know, one of the things that I don't think that there's, I don't, there was a statement made earlier of, you can't, health insurance goes up and you can't do it, that's not a cost you can do anything about. I don't think that's true, and I think we have done things about that. One of the reasons that we have a surplus is because we've made changes in our, working with the employees and with the unions, made changes, and we're moving to a high deductible plan, which saved a significant amount of money. And I think we'll continue to look at those kinds of things, because I think there do continue to be ways we can save money.
Okay, thank you. One last question. Again, another nitpicky example, but for a broader theme. I'm noticing that there's a 100% increase in bank service charges for the finance department, which kind of is one of the things that begs the question of how actively are we really negotiating with the third-party service providers that we use, like banks, telephone companies. One of the departments is spending almost $30,000 on telephone calls in the budget. So what are we really doing to negotiate with these companies for lower rates?
Well, with regard to negotiating for phone we've just entered it. We've talked, Patrick Moreland, the assistant town manager, has taken on entering in negotiations with SovereignNet, and both increasing, and when you see telephone, that's also our internet services, and also for some cell services. And pager services. We've reduced the number of pagers we have so that we don't carry as many pagers. Fire department will continue to carry pagers. Police they will continue to need pagers. But we have negotiated with SovereignNet with what we believe will be both a savings as well as an increase in our ability for internet services, for faster and better internet services, as well as services that will enable us to connect the buildings together. One of the inefficiencies we've had over the past years that we've rectified is that before, when we, due to the internet services that we had, departments outside of the municipal center staff had to come in to do purchase orders. They had to do it in the municipal center. We now have elevated, I would say that we were not running business style of internet, IT, and we've moved to that now so that anyone in any of the buildings can have real-time access to our financial systems for our purchase orders, for budget reports, and those types of things. So we've made, so while some of those are going to come at a higher cost, you may see the cost in here, but you don't see the savings in the efficiencies.
All right, thank you.
Ms. Kane?
Hi, Mary Kane, District 2. Just a brief question. How do you determine the head salary over time? I'm a little concerned if you look down the list of the head salary positions here in the town, that they have extensive overtime. Do you, Barbara, have to approve that overtime?
No department head has overtime. I'm not sure. If you could point to where you're looking at, Mary, that might help.
If you're looking at the individual salaries, on any of the individual salaries on page 65, you will see that there are overtime. Let's see, starting on page 65, there's overtime that is consistent with department head salaries. It may not be over time, but it's over budget by a significant amount.
Oh, over budget. You're saying that the salaries are over budget. So like in FY12, you have a difference in the budgeted as opposed to the actual. Some of that may be dependent on if that department head utilized vacation. We have an option for vacation buyback. It could be from vacation buyback. It's not by overtime, though. They don't get paid time and a half for anything. They don't get paid for any extra hours that they work. But there may be, if there's a incentive for, there's a sick leave incentive that they may have that could be, a couple $100. It could be that
These are
when we
significant
budget,
amounts.
I'd have to go and look at the actual, sometimes when we budget, we don't have the salary increases, because with those sometimes they're in a different one line item under, I can't remember where it is, under salary adjustments. Those have to be reallocated in the year. If those aren't reallocated, it makes it look the budget off. So I'd have to look at the specific items of what made something go over.
Because in any business, you would actually have someone overseeing that so that you would know in advance.
I'm overseeing that.
Like Spoon had said, on a regular basis, on a quarterly basis, you would know ahead of time.
I see the budgets every month, and I look and see where we're at.
And can you also explain to me about, in the fire department, there's overtime and fire outside overtime? I'm a little confused on that.
Overtime, outside overtime is when...
68.
You'll see outside overtime, I apologize, both in our fire department and in our police department. That's outside overtime is overtime they've been hired. They're getting paid. They may get paid to sit watch at, what do you guys... high school events, if they're called in for a high school event, and those have an offsetting revenue of revenue in the revenue line items that I believe is also outside revenue. So for instance, if you're going to look at the police department on page 63, outside revenue in FY12, or in FY14, if you look at that, is budgeted at $35,000. If you then go to their outside, if you then go to the expenses, on page 69, you'll see outside overtime is budgeted at $14,000. So typically when we do overtime, if we're hired to do something, the police may get hired to, if there's construction work, the state statute, there has to be a police officer involved. They may do some of that work. They also get hired by the school as well for some activities, and we charge a flat, we charge a rate for the officer, plus we charge all the fringe overtime, all the fringe for that, and that's what we collect. So typically, we should be seeing a higher revenue than an expense, because some of those expenses are in your benefit line items and retirement, Social Security, those types of things.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Reed Saver? How did I do? Pretty good, huh?
George Reed Savory, District 2. I need to go back to the bond for the police fire. Apparently, I don't quite understand how a bond works. But we've got $328,000 in interest for fiscal year 13-14. But we won't be actually doing any construction until sometime in 2014. Do we have to take that money initially and pay interest on it, or can't we delay that and have less interest?
Town meeting authorized the borrowing of $14 million and change for renovations at the police fire facility. There are a number of steps that are currently in process to plan. For example, we approved today a contract with the project manager to help design the plans so that we can put that project out to bid. Also, if I'm not mistaken, bond counsel is already working on the paper and the authorization we will need to borrow the money. What Barb related earlier is that depending on the timing of when the expenses are actually going to be incurred, it may be possible for us to borrow some of the money at a later date, and then interest costs would be less. I have that right, Tom?
They would be delayed.
They'd be delayed. But those decisions haven't been made yet.
Part of what you need to do, and I apologize, is that with what's going to be happening now is really the engineering of the final design and getting to construction. There are costs associated with that. And so, and again, as David said, the board will then be looking at, okay, how do we structure the debt on this?
So conceivably, it could be significantly less.
Of interest in the first year, depending on how it goes. Yes, John?
Yeah, this interest is based on borrowing the full $14,130,000. If we decide we want to delay and only borrow a portion of it, yes, it would be less.
Thank you.
Mr. Agave.
Spoon Agave, the chair of the Finance Committee. I'd like to start by thanking Mr. Gartenstein for being willing to look at the budget from day one. Now, that is important. It would also, along those lines, those people, if you read our report, you'll see there are 3 recommendations that all have to do with planning. And one of those includes going to 5-year planning for the budgets. And so that an outgoing select board does not leave an incoming select board holding the bag. And you are holding the bag now. You walk in with $1.42 million in shortfalls on day one. And that's going to take, I don't know what it's going to take. It's going to probably take the bare bones budget producing another $500,000 or $1 million in surplus. And that is another point that I would like to address, to point out in our report. In this year's town and school budgets, we have used $2.3 million in surpluses to pay for taxes. If there are not $2.3 million in surpluses next year, all of that money now has to be made up in additional taxes or severe cuts. It's now, I don't know, maybe I'll stop for a moment and ask our finance director how the town part looks right now as far as ending up where most of the way through the year. What kind of a surplus do you think we may have?
I think we're pretty close to being on budget, Spoon. If we have a surplus, I don't think it's going to be as large as we've had in prior years.
Well, if that's the case, if we come right in even and there isn't a surplus, then that means in the next budget we'll have to make up the $765,000 that we used in that capital improvement fund next year in taxes. And but planning is something we can't emphasize more. We talked about the 5-year planning for our budgets, and we talk about planning for capital improvements. I think you all will note that our capital plan only goes out 6 years, while we are taking out loans for projects that will be running 20 years. And there will probably be more loans, bonds between now and then. Not probably, there will be. We'll be looking at, I don't know how much the ladder truck is going to be, $800,000 or $900,000, and the filtration plant, and perhaps the whetstone interceptor project, and various water and sewer stuff, etc. Now, a lot of that's going to come out of the water and sewer. I think all of you have looked in the report to see that over the next 8 years, your average water and sewer costs are going to be rising about $800 a year, or whatever it was. from about 500 something average to about 1,200 and something average. So we can't emphasize more. We felt, although we didn't talk about it, we felt that had there been master planning in place for the town infrastructure, the police and fire project may well have been done for a lot less money. Hard to say what a lot meant, 1 million, 2 million, 3 or 4 million. We do have a very big question on the efficacy of putting a $5.5 million or $5 million police station addition onto a 125-year-old building. If that building doesn't last, I suspect if we abandon the municipal building, we will abandon that addition as well. So all this, it may work out, we can hope it does, but all this sort of reflects back on the lack of planning, and we can't emphasize that enough. I will stop there. We do recognize, we want to say that we know the board has kept expenses for the minimum, and we appreciate that. I think that they hold expenses to a minimum every year, but without that long-range look, it's very hard to make a good decision here on a big project. Thank you.
Barb?
I absolutely agree that we need to be planning, and I think we have been. We had a vote on a police fire facility in 2000, and it failed. We have never taken that out of the planning. Every year we propose a capital plan, and you see it in your budget, and every year it comes back and things get moved and mixed and that type of thing. I think part of what we need to do, in addition to good planning, is a stick-to-itiveness. I don't want taxes to go up. If we could not do, I don't think some of the facts haven't changed so either. We have issues, we have health and safety issues that need to be addressed. You have to address those. I wish they would have been addressed 10 years ago. I wish that, I don't want my taxes to go up. I'm a taxpayer in this town. I know what it's like, and I think, and actually, most of my department heads are. And so we understand probably better than anyone what increased debt means to our operating budgets. And I absolutely agree, Spoon, that we need to continue. And I've been appreciating the Finance Committee, and we've had discussions about the Finance Committee and how we can work together, better and more collaboratively. Because I think you've brought an eye to some of the really important issues that are easily swept under. If you drive Western Avenue today, or if you drive some of our other roads today, because if it's not being maintained. Roads, we can all name roads that aren't maintained. We can all name sidewalk sections that we have not maintained. This board has been in a position of having to reject a request to add a sidewalk that in a very legitimate place where there should be a sidewalk. They're already living, and we're living with some of those decisions because we have balanced our budgets on the capital. We've reduced paving in past years because it made it easier to do some of the other things. I agree. I think this coming year we're going to be really looking, there's going to be some hard decisions that we're going to be needing to make. But I also firmly believe that we can't continue with the status quo, and I look forward to these discussions occurring throughout the year. And I agree that planning is important, but it needs to be mindful planning in which we're really willing to say, okay, this is our 5-year plan. And that's hard because most of the people who sit up here are sitting up here for 1 year. But I look forward to it. I look forward to the discussions, and I look forward to finding ways where we can reduce our tax rates so they're not such a burden.
I can't see who that is. Is that Mr.
Andy.
Davis?
It's Andy.
Mr. Davis.
Hi, Andy Davis, District 3. First off, page 68, I think it's really great that we've lowered the tipping fees. And that's a really, maybe somebody highlighted that and I was asleep, but that $35,000 savings down 11%, is that pretty much because of the pilot project on the cow? I mean, that's a really big drop. Is it just that nobody's throwing, there's a big drop in consumption?
It's because we really started enforcing the ordinance with regard to mandatory recycling.
Right.
And that's really, and you'll notice in FY12, you'll see that our actual was at 271. So that 275 is actually with IDEA. That doesn't even take into consideration potential savings for composting, because when we were doing this budget, we hadn't yet made, there hadn't been a decision to go to townwide composting yet.
Right. So that's a real positive thing we could work towards in this idea of signing more people up, because I've heard numbers from the state that more than half of what's in the waste stream going to landfills does not have to be going to landfills. So we're really throwing money away. The other thing about that is that this is just the municipal trash stream. And I'm sometimes amazed at local businesses that just seem to be throwing away things that are compostable. Once you start composting, you get obsessed with it. You start seeing compostable items all over the place. And we're paying for that in products. We're paying for that in cost of items, and we're also using up our state landfill. So I just wanted to highlight that as a real upbeat thing. I think enforcing those ordinances is really good. And now, Spoon was talking about the long-range stuff, so I was looking in the capital improvements here, and I'll admit, I haven't often looked out to 2018 and 2019. They're just coming over the horizon the last couple of years. I see under, on page 77, one thing, I was originally looking this up because I live near Strand Avenue, and I see there's no price in there. I think it might be because the bids haven't come in for a retaining wall on Strand Avenue that's been the subject of quite a lot of discussion in my neighborhood. But then I noticed out in 18 and 19, which is only 5 and 6 years away, over $1 million in this capital plan for retaining walls on Elliott Street and Union Hill. And then I'm also seeing, in terms of working on intersections above that, on page 76, Union Hill intersection is another thing targeted. I know the state might be involved in that. Mm-hmm. But I'm wondering if any of that 5 and 6 years away was considered in approving the plan for the skate park right there. And I'm only bringing it up because it is related to budget. We're talking about spending $300,000 on the retaining walls right below 10,000 square feet of flat concrete. Was that considered at all in the discussion at the select board level of the design?
No.
No.
Thank you.
No. Are there any other questions? Okay, so seeing none, the other items that might warrant some discussion here tonight include Article 19, which was a request for $172,000 from the fund balance to replace the 2 compressors at the skating rink. I'm going to briefly provide an overview and explain that a number of months ago, we learned that the compressors were on their last legs at the skating rink. And Carol, with the assistance of some contractors, was able to jerry-rig something together so that we had skating through the end of this season. But we got a bid right before the warning for town meeting needed to be finalized to replace the compressors for $172,000. And the plan we were going to present to you was to borrow that money from ourselves, from the unassigned fund balance, and then to pay it back from the capital fund that bills up from skating fees every year, because there's a skating rink repair fund that gets funded by skating rink fees. But in the last couple of days, as a result of additional work that the Parks and Recs director has worked on, we've gotten additional efficiency studies and different suggestions for how we should be repairing the equipment at the skating rink. The new bids that we've got, or the new proposals, are much more expensive than the 172 that was referenced in this article. I think the cheapest one, Barb, is 320?
362.
362. And they go up to $500,000 and $800,000. We just got today data from the analyst who proposed these three different systems, and Efficiency Vermont's analysis of the numbers and their recommendations. And if I'm not mistaken, when we talked about this at the select board meeting right before informational town meeting, the board concluded that we were not going to be ready for this article to be voted on next Saturday, because we need to research and digest that information before we can responsibly make a recommendation to you. We don't have the authority to withdraw this article, but I don't think we're prepared at this time to ask you to vote in favor, because I don't think we know what the plan is just yet. So I don't know if anybody's got questions about that, or if Barb or Carol have anything to add, please.
Do you want to come up here and I'll
Yeah.
move over?
I see.
I believe I've just been promoted. So.
It's a good Bob Euchre moment.
That power.
I'll let go to your head.
It's already there. Too late.
Look out, world.
I think David just summarized the situation in a good nutshell. All this started hitting the fan just after the first of the year, and about a week prior to the warning being, prior to the last date that the warning could be put out. We did, our contractor that maintains the facility on a regular basis gave us, a 5-day budget figure, of $172,000. Looking at that, at the time it seemed like, okay, this is a budget figure that we can use to go forward. After that, we got quite a bit of publicity out of it, and we started receiving numerous phone calls from various vendors, including, Efficiency Vermont. And doing due diligence, we thought it would be most appropriate to have an analysis done of the entire refrigeration process, the mechanical process at the skating facility. As you all know, the compressors are vital to the heartbeat of the skating facility. You don't have refrigeration, you don't have ice. With that being said, a lot of this came out, a lot of the information that we received has been in the 11th hour, as David alluded to a few minutes ago. We got the analysis late Monday. We've got new information late today, about 4:45. And I don't feel that we can, or I can sit here and sell you something that I don't have a good handle on at this point. And I think we need to, as David said, encourage you to vote this down next Saturday, when we can come back to you and have a special town meeting and give you the nuts and the bolts and sell you the project that I'm comfortable to sell you. And it may very well be the 362 or something different. But at this point, I don't feel we have all the facts to give you at this time.
Mr. Wilmerding.
John Wilmerding, District 3. Almost a technical question. Was there a request for proposals issued and duly advertised for the cost of this item?
Are you referring to the analysis?
Actually, what's stated in the report, the replacement of the compressors. Now, the reason I'm asking is because I chanced to be speaking with a refrigeration provider in town who told me that they wished they had had a chance to bid on this project. So I'm just asking if there was a request for proposals, if it was public, and if general contractors in this field in the town had a chance to respond.
Barb?
We first have to get an estimate, and we got that from the people who work on that, of what it might cost. That's the estimate then that we bring to this body. And if this body were to say, yes, let's do that, then we do the bid process.
So that hasn't happened yet?
No, has not happened yet.
That
We're even further from that now.
Thank you.
Did, and in fact, part of the reason we did that Carol suggested, working with Efficiency Vermont, that we do the assessment, or we do look at the various options, was so that we would have more information. So I congratulate her and her team for doing that work.
I like your recommendation, by the way.
Mr. Clark?
It sounds exciting. Is Efficiency Vermont coming in? Because it sounds like an exciting opportunity where we may have to pay a little more, but save a lot of electricity or bills down the road. I know the grad center where I worked, I think, took 30 houses offline because of the new chiller, Efficiency Vermont said, because we were actually getting solar gain that we were using Freon to cool in the winter. We were making cold air in the winter.
And Efficiency Vermont was involved in the process. We need then to look at those figures.
So that sounds exciting. Is all. I hope that happens.
Ms. Cadron.
Just a quick note of encouragement. I just want to say that it's great that you guys are looking to actively do this and that you're working very hard and looking into the different things. Just as a general note, I will say this is one of the few places where the town turns a profit. We're projected in here, it says, to make $7,000 off of the skating rink next year. So I strongly encourage everyone to, support them in actively trying to keep this revenue stream coming in. Thank you.
Unless there's further discussion about our asking you to vote that down. Ms. King?
Just had a procedural question. Is that the only way that can be eliminated? It can't be tabled, or Dora, you would know? It has to be voted down?
Unless Ms. French has got a different view, I believe that, we could continue it possibly to a date certain, but we're not going to have a date certain because we're not going to be ready.
Okay. Thank you.
Unless there's further inquiry about that skating rink, I think the next potential item where people may want to have some discussion is Article 21 about the DID district. What's her name? Judy. Judy what?
Davidson.
Ms. Davidson.
Barb, you can have your seat back.
Hi, Judy Davidson from District 3, and I'm just going to speak briefly, and then I'm going to introduce Bob Ozer. As some of you who read the Reformer this morning know, there's a group of members of town meeting who've been concerned about the future of the River Garden and wanting it to remain some kind of public space, and they have created an amendment that they will pose on town meeting day. And Bob has done a lot of work on this, and he's a new member of town meeting now, and he's going to discuss what the amendment is, so that you have some understanding. Town meeting gets pretty confusing. So the point of this is just to enable a public discussion of the future of the River Garden. And even though there may be some that say, because this is a line item just authorizing $78,000 for the budget of BABB, it doesn't really mean that we can discuss the future of the River Garden, which is not a part of this. But in truth, the town meeting reps can, even if somebody were to say, even the moderator were to say, this is not germane to the topic of the $78,000, budget item, town meeting members can overrule that kind of a decision and say, we think a discussion of the future of the River Garden is germane to this particular budget item for BAB. So I just want people to remembering that town meeting members have the ability and the power to decide what is germane to this body. So I would like to introduce Bob Ozer, who will discuss what the amendment will look like.
Yeah, before Bob takes the floor,
Yep.
Maybe I'll explain the DID district article and the process that led to us getting there. And then if somebody else wants to speak to it, we'll give them the floor, if that's
Thank you
okay.
very much, Mr. Gartenstein.
Oh, thanks, Ms. Davids. We have a downtown improvement district, and the Downtown Improvement District has a designated organization, BABB, whose responsibility is to advocate for the interests of the downtown. And we have an ordinance adopted at the municipal level that sets out a process for how the DID district is established, and then how a budget is designed, how an organization is picked for doing the work of the Downtown Improvement District. They're supposed to design a budget. They're supposed to present that budget to the Select Board. We approve it and present it to you. We went through this process over a period of months, I don't know, December into January. The budget was sent back to BABB more than once. First, because the process had not been followed and there had not been public presentation of the budget, and then because there were questions about the budget itself. This is a level-funded BABB Downtown Improvement District budget that's being presented, and that data about how it was constructed, I'm not sure it's not in the town report, is it? Or is it?
It should be.
All right, it's at pages.
I will look.
Barb's going to look. I will represent. My understanding is that what the downtown organization, the designated downtown organization, said in building the budget is that none of this town money, $78,000, which is raised by taxes on the businesses and property owners in the downtown district, none of that money is for the operation or anything to do with the River Garden. So that was a question that we focused on extensively at the Select Board meetings, considering the DID budget. And I understand people have a significant interest. Some people have significant interest in what's going to happen to the River Garden, but this budget article doesn't include any money for the River Garden because they weren't asking for any money for the River Garden. Do I have that right?
True. That's true.
Right.
That's true.
So if anybody has questions about the first, before we talk about the River Garden issue, anybody have any questions about the budget for the DID district? All right, so then, Mr. Ozer. And once again, I'd like you very much to present what you're offering, but debate really should happen at town meeting.
Robert Ozer, District 2.
That is Ann.
First time I've said anything here, so I think I should be maybe forming this as a question, not as a polemic of sorts. The part of Article 21 that has been warned, on the part that you have in front of you, says that the assessment, the $78,000, will be used for the capital and operating costs of projects of the town's duly designated downtown organization. So do you know what the capital project is, or the capital cost of a project is that that budget is going for?
What I can represent, I don't have that budget in front of me at this time, is that there were costs adding up to $72,000. They included some capital costs, if I recall, for
No.
the flower project.
Oh, yeah, that wouldn't be capital, though. Yeah. No, there really wasn't any capital. And I'm actually would ask if there's
Is there a BABB
representative here.
I don't see.
Oh, yes.
There, Ms. O'Connor.
I'm Kate O'Connor, District 3, but I also am on the BABB board. There are no capital costs in the BABB budget. And if I can add one thing to clarify, David was totally right in what he was saying about how the $78,000 comes about. We have to go through a budget process per the town ordinance. In the town ordinance, we have to present our budget to our members. The members are the property owners downtown who are the ones that contribute the tax that comes up to $78,000. So we had a publicly warned meeting with our members, the property owners. They voted on that budget, and they voted explicitly, and they told us that they didn't want that $78,000 to go to the operation of the River Garden. And I'm happy to answer any more questions that come up.
Mr. Webster, is that like a point of order at this point?
Point of information.
Sure, please come to the mic.
Don Webster, District 3. I was in on the beginning of all this back, I remember, in the early teens, and my memory is one of the few things I have left to bring to this, but I do remember that the reason the word capital got into there is because the original enabling statutes that came from the state of Vermont used that language. And when we were creating the district, we debated, since we knew most of our operating expenses were not going to be capital, whether we really needed that. We decided we'd stay with the statutory language at the state level in case sometime there's a capital project that comes up they'd want to fund. So I think that's just the only reason it got there is that's where it was originally, and there was a premise that it might at some point want to be used for capital expenditures.
Thank you. That's helpful.
And that's actually, Ms. Don's right in that most of the wording for this it's the same wording every year, and it came from the fact that that wording is also mirrored from the statute to the ordinance to the motion.
So, Mr. Ozer, please.
So I think you have the general idea that the $78,000 assessment is the same as it was last year. The Article 21 that appears on the warning this year is exactly the same article as last year. The only difference is that at some point in time, and I say at some point in time because I'm not been able to secure any minutes or information to tell me when, but at some point in time there was a meeting and it was decided that the Building a Better Brattleboro would divest itself of the River Garden. We don't know, and I was talking with someone who's much more knowledgeable than I in legal matters this afternoon, whether a vote to divest is a vote to sell. Bylaws of the organization say that a vote to sell requires 2/3 membership vote. The budget meeting, which was subsequent to that vote to divest, started to get some conversation about the River Garden, but the conversation was, no, we need to approve this budget at this point. And there was even some question as to whether there was a quorum at that meeting. I was present at that meeting. I may have inadvertently contributed to the quorum by putting down a dollar bill and saying, I'll be a member of the organization. So there's a lot of stuff behind the scenes in this, but the wording is the same. The capital cost, the operating cost, that language is the same. What we're saying, well, give you a little bit more of information if I may, and maybe I have to ask for some indulgence because there's a lot of information in this. And I'll start in 1999, that the legislature provided $150,000 to the town of Brattleboro for the purchase of the land where the River Garden now sits. Building a Better Brattleboro at that point in time had a closing date on August the 5th, 1999, but they didn't have the funds. So they came before the Select Board, and the Select Board at that time agreed to take a deed from Building a Better Brattleboro for $150,000 in the event that they sell the property to a for-profit entity. In return, transferring funds to the downtown organization, at that time Building a Better Brattleboro, to buy the River Garden, to put that money down on August the 5th. They've held on to that property ever since. So then, at some point, there's a meeting. We don't know how many people were there. We don't know what that meeting consists of. I've not seen minutes. I've requested them. I was told some things are not in writing in an email this morning. The River Garden was divested. The budget became before the Select Board. In that budget, there was $37,000 which was left floating around. And I forget who said that, but I remember the word floating being used. The budget was then sent back to BAB so that the floating money could be dispersed. It was dispersed in certain line items. The total budget was reduced by a certain amount. Expenses were increased by a certain amount. And that's the budget that sits behind this. It's the elephant in the room that we're not acknowledging. So we proposed an amendment. Oh, before I go there, so there's a question about if you do an amendment to an article, whether it's germane. And I need to make my third confession of the day and say I haven't read those Civil War cases. But there are cases going back to the Civil War about what is germane to an article for the purpose of amendment. But anyway, I would submit to you that, or I would question, maybe I should form it as a question, whether the warned wording of capital and operating costs would make an amendment germane if our amendment said that we agree to the $78,000 assessment, but to include the continued operation of the River Garden through this fiscal year, and to authorize the town meeting moderator to appoint a committee to work with Building a Better Brattleboro to find an organization or manager to maintain the River Garden as a public space for the benefit of all. Building a Better Brattleboro has a RFP process, or made a press release to say that they would have an RFP process, but the information is not available yet. It won't be available until March 18th. March 18th is only several days before town meeting. They would expect to have a sale all wrapped up by the end of their fiscal year, which is June 30th. That may not be very realistic. I don't think that we want a boarded-up building on the center of High and Main Street. I'm not sure what the contingency plan for that is, and we would like to submit an amendment to Article 21 to take that into account.
I think what I'll say is that we're not going to be making any determinations tonight about parliamentary decisions that Mr. Crisp is going to have to make next Saturday. Good luck to him. Oh, there he is. That's right. So I think that I heard the language of the amendment when Mr. Ozer read the end of what we were going to be asked to vote on. And I guess if there's any questions about the budget item, about the budget item, that's probably what's on the floor here at the informational meeting. I don't remember your name.
Kathy Urfer.
Ms. Urfer.
Kathy Urfer, back in District 3, thanks to the rezoning.
It's a yo-yo.
Yeah, two questions. One, and I guess this maybe is for Kate. Can we get a copy of the budget somehow? I don't know who's in charge and who I need to chase, but That would be helpful.
We will
We'll have that
post it
available.
online. Can we post it online?
We can post it online. We can have it available in the town clerk's office. We can give it to the town clerk for next Wednesday's informational meeting.
Okay.
Do you come to that? Oh, sorry. And we'll have it available Saturday.
Okay. And then the other is, if we were to, as a body, vote no on Article 21 and BAB is essentially not funded, what happens?
Well, BAB has got other funding sources as well. And the things that the Select Board decided to forward to you that are planned in their budget wouldn't be funded through this mechanism, and then we'd have to go back and look at the viability of the Downtown Improvement District because we didn't have a funded downtown organization.
Yeah, we'd have, I'm hesitant to hypothesize on what would occur if that failed, because there's a couple of people I'd want to talk with, and I'd also want to speak with the state and the downtown district. I think it would there'd be some problems. We'd have to figure out what those would be, though.
I was kind of wondering if it creates a situation that is illegal, because we sort of have this thing and then we're not doing it. Anyway, it sounds like that is something to check into. And I guess the other part of that is, if we vote no, does that mean those businesses are not assessed the fee?
Unless there's a special meeting, unless there'd be another special town meeting, representative town meeting to set an amount, we wouldn't have an amount. The board would not have the authorization to set a tax amount. So I don't see that there would be a tax. My concern is that we would lose our designation is up for renewal in March. We would lose our designation. That has significant impacts, particularly with some of the development that is being proposed, a huge development that's being proposed in our downtown right now, because you get historic tax credits are based on whether you have a downtown improvement district. There would be also some other implications if we would lose. I'd be more concerned about losing our designation, because we would have not shown our dedication to funding the organization. So that's where my concern isn't about the organization. It isn't about how we would tax. My concern is a bigger concern with regard to whether we would lose our designation and the implications of losing our designation on historic tax credits and some other grants that we receive because of having a downtown designation.
I'm going to call on Dora next, but we will do that work before next Saturday so that we can answer the question at town meeting as best we can. What would be the impact of a no vote?
Okay, I mean, because it seems to me then that an amendment or the language of amendment may carry a lot of weight in terms of how people would feel about passing it or not passing it as it is. So.
Dora?
I just want to say that in response to that question is there's a lot of different ways that the downtown designation can be done. Some towns do it themselves. There are private organizations that are not tax funded. So there's a lot of different options. And the biggest issue with voting down the budget would be that we don't have a mechanism in place, and responsibility would probably fall on the town of managing some of the day-to-day grant management and stuff with but there is nothing in place to replace them at the moment. But there's a lot of different options, and it's not a cut and dry situation.
I think trying to answer the question is speculation at this point.
Yeah, I'd prefer not to.
We will try to have the answer next Saturday. I don't remember your name. Yes, sir.
Mr. Harvey.
Mr. Harvey. Thanks.
George Harvey, District 3. I must say, I'm getting a little fuzzy-headed in my old age. There are details to this thing that I just don't get. I really want to have a simple explanation of what this means. We would be raising and appropriating a sum of $78,000, which is going to be applied as a tax to the businesses in this area?
To the property owners in the district, yes.
To the property owners in the district, regardless of whether they're part of BABB or not?
All property owners are automatically members of BABB.
And BABB is asking us to do this so that they can get something which we would be giving them, presumably for the benefit of the community. This $78,000 is being raised in taxes, and then it's going to BABB for something which is for the benefit of the community. And you know, I can't think of a single thing that BABB has done that comes into my mind aside from the river garden, and I know that it's done a lot. I'm not arguing that at all. It's just that you know, I want to be able to explain to somebody that they're doing something that's worth $78,000, and at the same time that the one thing which is visible to a lot of people is somehow dropping out of the picture because somebody in a business organization is telling the town that they're not interested in maintaining it. And it almost strikes me as a kind of blackmail to say, well, you know, we're going to drop this thing from what we want to do because it's no longer of any interest to us. And I don't want to argue the case, but I do want to understand it better than I do. And I wonder if I can be straightened out.
If a member of the downtown organization wants to respond, that would be the first step. Ms. O'Connor.
I know we don't want to get in a big debate about this, so if I go into the world of debate, you can slap my wrist.
It's a good question.
I'll try to be really quick. BABB, I'll just give everybody a sort of a history. BABB is one organization, and we have two legs. We have been designated by the town, or by the state through the town, or through the town by the state, to be the designated downtown group, because there's a program, as they were describing, it's the Vermont Downtown Program. Through that program, we get tax credits or special grants for the downtown district. Again, BABB is that designated group. We are also the owners of the River Garden. We don't have to be the designated downtown group to own the River Garden, and we're not owning the River Garden because we're the designated downtown group. They're two separate things. The DID money comes from the property owners downtown. Anybody who is a property owner is a member of BABB. That $78,000 that we raise through the DID goes to programs that benefit the downtown because we're a designated downtown group. So it has to go through to programs that our members vote on. It's separate from the River Garden. We have two different budgets going on, one River Garden, one the downtown designated group. What we spend that money on, or how we come to spend that money, there's an ordinance, downtown ordinance, that says here's how you get to where the DID money is spent. We have to have the approval of our members, who are the property owners downtown, who are the ones that make up that $78,000. We submitted a budget to them. They told us loud and clear, we don't want our money going to the second leg of your organization, which is the River Garden. BABB has tried hard for 3 years now. It was 3 years ago that the board voted. I wasn't actually on the board at that time. But 3 years ago, the board had a vote and said, listen, the River Garden is draining our budget. You know, we're not able to do what we really want to do for the downtown property owners because we're just getting, our money is getting sucked into the management of the River Garden. And that's a whole other thing, which it'll take me an hour, so I won't do that. But, so 3 years ago, there was a vote by the board saying, we're going to wait 3 years. In 3 years, we're going to evaluate. If we're not financially able to keep the River Garden, we need to divest ourselves of that. And as Bob said, on March 18th, we're going to put a RFP out. We don't know what divest means right now. You know what I mean? If we're opening it to anybody. If someone comes to us and says, hey, you know, we'll take it over, you folks don't have to worry about it, fine. We're not saying we're selling it, renting it. We don't know yet, because it really depends on who comes to us. We're not dumping the River Garden. We, believe it or not, even though, you know, we can't sustain it, we love that building because it's a big part of downtown. We have to do right by our members as the designated downtown group, and we have to do right by the River Garden. And that's our intent here, is to do right by everybody. I don't know if that answers the question, but we don't own the, if you look at that, the article, the money goes to the designated downtown group. That doesn't have to be BABB. It can be anybody. The town can decide, hey, we don't want you guys to be the designated downtown group anymore. BABB can say, we don't want to be the designated downtown group anymore. The state of Vermont can say, we don't want to be, but they don't want us to be the downtown group anymore. So, you know, you can say, hey, BABB, we're not going to give you that $78,000. Then, you know, we're not the designated downtown group. Then BABB has to make a decision. The fact of the matter is, whether you give us that $78,000 or you don't, we are still the owners of the River Garden. It's not a town-owned building. BABB is a private organization or a private nonprofit organization who owns the River Garden. I don't know if that makes sense, but the River Garden is a separate issue than being the designated downtown group. I don't know if that make it more confusing, but.
No, it was very helpful. The other thing that I will add is that a summary of last year's BABB activities is on page 38 of the town report, and the budget calls for continuation going forward of the same sorts of activities. There are new signs downtown, directional signs, that were obtained through BABB's work. There's a pamphlet that's been circulating that provides, I think it's a parking resources map. That was a project of BABB. The flowers, the holiday lights in the winter, the literary festival, the Take a Chance Dance. There's a number of things listed here on page 38. Mr. Harvey.
I think I get your point.
Yeah.
And thank you for your input on that. I think I might be slightly less confused. I'm still confused. I'm getting there.
So once again, I want to try to avoid debate. We'll have plenty of time for that on town meeting day. But Ms. Davidson?
Yeah? I asked that Kate give us for time.
The mic.
We've been trying to find a budget for the River Garden, and what are the expenses, what is the income, what's the deficit, because it's kind of confusing. And I just wonder, could Kate from BABB provide to town meeting members, in addition to the budget currently for BABB, what has been the budget for the River Garden for the past 2 or 3 years in terms of expenses, insurance, and what's the deficit been? Because I think that would be very helpful for town meeting members to have.
I'm going to take that as a request that's directed to BABB, not the town, because the River Garden is not a town building. Mr. Cadron? John, I'll get you next.
I just wanted to say that I think it has been very easy and convenient for people in town to villainize BABB for their decision to divest it. Just people looking for blame in general, I guess. I do, however, want to point out the fact that in this section on page 38, it says that the Downtown Improvement District realized just about over $1 million, less, $626,000 in tax benefits as a result. So I think we really got a bang for our buck for the whole downtown. If we spent $78,000 on this and got out over $600,000 in tax credits, I think we really need to look at what is the larger benefit of having the downtown designation than just villainizing BABB for one property that it owns. Thank you.
Mr. Wilmerding.
I have to agree with David. In my background as a nonprofit administrator, I can see the difficult process that BABB has had to go through. And I think that there's been a clear discernment of the two pillars, as Kate was describing them, of BABB's mission, that they have to concentrate on one and not the other. But when I was working with the Finance Committee last month, and we were beginning to see the news about the decision to divest the River Garden, I asked the Finance Director, John O'Connor, if he would please discover for us the amount of public funding that has gone into the River Garden since its inception. And unfortunately, a couple weeks later, our chair on the Finance Committee overruled that request and said we couldn't really deal with that while we're still working on our reports for town meeting. So I'd like to renew that request now in public. I have a document that Andrea Livermore, the executive director of BABB, gave me, which proves that there's at least $750,000 that went into the purchase and the construction of the River Garden on that site. It is state money, it is federal money, and it is very, very substantial. And I think that because of that, the River Garden is a public trust that we can't just slough off because it's inconvenient to continue to maintain it. So I really think the town does owe us a service here. We're being presented with a budget for BABB that no longer includes the River Garden, any aspect of it, which in effect signals the Select Board's approval for BABB to divest the River Garden. And this is only 1 month or so after the issue first came to the public's attention in January via an article in the Reformer by Howard Weiss Tisman. So I would like to see the town do this study, in particular with Mr. O'Connor, who I know will do a great job, and discover the amount of public funds that went into the River Garden so we have the full picture.
I don't see any other hands. So the remaining articles about which people might have questions include Article 22, which is the raising and appropriating money for the special assessments for the Mountain Home Park Special Benefit Assessment Task District. I think it's very similar to the identical article last year. But if anybody has questions, we're prepared to answer them. That's Article 22. And seeing no hands, I know that there was recently a meeting with the Energy Committee about the PACE District, but the last Article 25 has to do with designating the town as a property assessed clean energy district. Does anybody have questions about that Article 25? If you want to speak, that's okay, but I don't think there's any questions, but please approach. Come on.
I'm just prepared to answer questions.
What's that again? Bob Reuter. Mr. Reuter is available for the Energy Committee if anybody has questions about the PACE District.
Yeah, Bob Reuter, District 3. I'm on the Energy Committee, and PACE is Property Assessed Clean Energy. It's a way to finance energy improvements on homes. There's no cost to the town to do this. The town has the ability to add an administrative fee. to the assessments, and we're going to be having another informational meeting about PACE districts and next Thursday evening at 7 o'clock if people have questions in the meantime. But I'm here now to answer any questions anyone might have.
We hope that you'll be available on town meeting day, because maybe we'll yield the floor to you to explain the article.
Sure, and I've just been selected to be one of the fill-in reps for town meeting. So,
congratulations. Ms. Cadron, do you want to? No? All right. Anybody have any questions about number 25? All right. Before we head towards adjournment, are there any other matters about which anybody who's in attendance wants to raise an inquiry before town meeting? Well, then we'll entertain a motion to adjourn. From the board.
So moved.
All right. All those in favor of adjourning, please say aye. 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 Thank you for coming.